Who doesn't love stats? And like every sport, Formula One is full of them. Some of these are more commonly known, such as ones like most championships, career wins, or poles, and there's also some famous ones, including ones like Andrea de Cesaris having the record for most consecutive retirements, Teo Fabi never leading a lap despite taking 3 poles in his career, or Hans Harder being the only driver to DNQ, DNF, and be disqualified from the same race. Mixed in, though, there are also plenty of other lesser known obscure stats, and in my opinion, sometimes more interesting. Therefore, I thought it would be fun to take a look at a few of these stats today. Before getting into some of these stats, though, if you enjoy the video, please like and share it and leave a comment. Also, if you want to see more similar content, then subscribe to the channel. Also, one more thing about these stats. In order to avoid repeating it multiple times throughout the video, all of these do not include the Indianapolis 500 races that were part of the World Championship from 1950 to 1960. If any of you don't know, the Indianapolis 500 was part of the World Championship in those years, but they pretty much always consisted of drivers and cars that did not participate in the rest of the season, so they aren't really the most relevant from a statistical point of view. For the first stat I have, it involves drivers taking their first win, pole, or fastest lap. 6 times there has been a driver who has taken their first career pole and a different driver take their first career win the same weekend. 13 weekends have seen different drivers take their first career win and fastest lap, and 13 weekends have also had different drivers take their first career pole and fastest lap. However, just 1 time has there been a different driver to take their first career pole, win, and fastest lap in the same weekend. That race weekend was the 1968 French Grand Prix. The weekend started off with Jochen Rindt taking his first pole, then Jackie Ickx took his first win, while Pedro Rodriguez took his first career fastest lap. I tried looking to see what the closest this came to occurring again, and while I didn't find anything extremely close, I did find 2 occasions that were at least worth mentioning, and they happened to be just a few races apart. At the 1961 Dutch Grand Prix, Wolfgang von Trips took his first win and Jim Clark set his first fastest lap, while in qualifying Richie Ginther was third, but 2/10ths off his first pole. That same year in Italy, von Trips took his first pole, while Giancarlo Baghetti his only fastest lap, while Dan Gurney finished second, but 31 seconds off of what would have been his first career win. The next stat I have involves podiums from outside the top 10 on the grid. It's obviously not the most common thing to see drivers starting outside the top 10 finish on the podium, but it does happen from time to time. It's even rarer to have a race in which 2 drivers starting outside the top 10 finish on the podium, and that has only happened 25 times. However, just once has there been a race in which all 3 podium finishers started outside the top 10, and that was the 1975 Spanish Grand Prix. Race winner Jochen Mass started from 11th, Jackie Ickx finished second from 16th on the grid, and Carlos Reutemann third from 15th in a race that was cut short after just 29 laps from its original distance of 75. There's also been 2 races in which 2 of the podium finishers started outside the top 10 and the third podium finisher started 10th, which were the 1978 South African Grand Prix, in which John Watson finished third from 10th on the grid, and the 1999 European Grand Prix, where Jarno Trulli finished second from 10th. The last time we've had a race with 2 podium finishers starting outside the top 10 was the 2019 German Grand Prix. Throughout F1's history, there have been 159 combinations of drivers that have shared the podium together more than once, and among these combinations, many of the drivers included are world champions. Just 3 of these 159 trios include no drivers which won a championship. The first of these 3 is Jacques Laffite, Carlos Reutemann, and John Watson, which shared the podium together at the 1979 Argentine and 1981 British Grand Prix. Then there was Alessandro Nannini, Riccardo Patrese, and Thierry Boutsen, which were on the podium together at the 1989 Japanese and Australian Grand Prix, which also happened to be successive races, and then there was Juan Pablo Montoya, Rubens Barrichello, and Ralf Schumacher, which were together at the 2001 Italian and 2003 European Grand Prix. Among the combinations which featured only one world champion in the 3 drivers, the most common trio was Michael Schumacher, Rubens Barrichello, and David Coulthard, which shared the podium together 8 times, all of which occurred from 1999 to 2002. The next one I have involves drivers setting a pole time but not actually starting from pole. We often think of this as more of a modern phenomenon with the introduction of grid penalties the last couple of decades, but you may actually be surprised how far back it was this happened for the first time, as well as the driver that lost the pole. It was actually all the way back at the 1959 German Grand Prix in which Cliff Allison was not able to start from pole after setting the fastest time by a tenth of a second over his Ferrari teammate Tony Brooks. The reason for this was that Allison was only a reserve entry for the race and was only able to race after Jean Beira was tragically killed in an accident in a support race the day before. Being just a reserve entry, though, we had to start from the back of the grid and retire just 2 laps in. The second Porsche of Wolfgang von Trips was also withdrawn from the race, so Ian Burgess was also allowed to start as a reserve entry, but he set the slowest time in the practice session, so would have had to start at the back regardless. Qualifying obviously isn't everything, but it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that one way to greatly increase your chances at winning the championship is by starting at the front of the field to put yourself in better control of the race. However, not every title winner has been able to put themselves at the front of the grid every weekend. Niki Lauda in 1984 holds the record for the worst average grid position among any drivers in a World Championship season. His average grid spot that year was just 7.69, which was only the 8th best average in the field that year, and he didn't even start a race on the front row. His best qualifying of the year was 3rd in Britain, while his worst was 15th at the European Grand Prix, but he was able to do a fantastic job that year turning those into great results. Two other drivers have won a world championship in a year in which they had an average grid position over 6, and those are Jody Scheckter in 1979 with an average of 6.13 and Keke Rosberg in 1982 with an average of 6.07, both of whom scored a single pole on those years. Denny Hulme in 1967 was the only other driver besides Lauda to win a championship in a year he did not score a pole with an average of 5.45, but he did have 2 second places on the year. Jeff Lees had only 5 career starts, but he still had one of the most unique careers in Formula One. Those 5 starts came with 5 different teams. He made his first career start with Tyrrell at the 1979 German Grand Prix, then drove for Shadow at 1980 South Africa, Ensign at 1980 Netherlands, Theodore at 1982 Canada, and finally Lotus at 1982 France. In between that, he also failed to qualify for 7 races, most of which were for the teams he raced for, but he also tried to qualify a privately entered Williams at the 1980 Canadian Grand Prix, which could have been a 6th team he raced for in 6 races. Next, we are looking at 1-2 finishes, specifically years in which they did not occur. Only 2 seasons in F1's history have not had a single 1-2 finish, and they happen to be close together. Those would be 1975 and 1977. In 1975, 3-1-3 finishes occurred, while in 1977, there was just a single one, which was by Ferrari at Brazil. There was even only one other occasion in 1977 in which teammates shared the podium, and that was at Monaco when the Ferrari drivers were 2nd and 3rd. We have gotten close to having other seasons in which there weren't any 1-2 finishes, with 11 of them only having one, including 1997 when the only 1-2 was completed by McLaren at the final race, but the most surprising of these to me was 1993, considering how dominant Williams was at the time, with their only 1-2 coming at France. Now let's take a look at first-time pole sitters. On only 5 occasions have we seen a driver take a first pole at the same Grand Prix in at least 2 straight years. The times that it happened just 2 years in a row were at the British Grand Prix in 1950 and 1951, the Italian Grand Prix in 1960 and 1961, and the Swedish Grand Prix in 1974 and 1975, and then the South African Grand Prix also had a first-time pole sitter 3 years in a row from 1973 to 1975. There was just one stretch longer than that, and it was a whopping 5 years in a row at the United States Grand Prix West at Long Beach from 1979 through its final race in 1983. Gilles Villeneuve took his first pole in 1979, followed by Nelson Piquet in 1980, Riccardo Patrese in 1981, Andrea de Cesaris in 1982, and Patrick Tambay in 1983. Both Villeneuve and Piquet would convert those poles to wins, with Piquet's also being his first win, while the other 3 all retired from the race. 127 drivers have set a fastest lap in a World Championship race, and quite a few of those have seen success in Formula One. However, out of all those drivers, just a single one failed to score a single point in their career, and that is Brian Henton, who set the fastest lap at the 1982 British Grand Prix. Henton started 19 races from 1975 to 1982 with a best career finish of 7th at 1982 Germany, just missing out on a point by a single place, while in Austria that same year he did retire from 5th with 20 laps to go. There have been other occasions in which drivers set a fastest lap in a season in which they didn't score a point, but even those are rare. Alberto Ascari set two and Jean Beira a single fastest lap in 1954, but points were available for fastest lap then, but those fastest lap points would be the only ones they each scored that year. In 1976, Jean-Pierre Jarier set the fastest lap in Brazil, but failed to score points that year, and strangely enough, he did the same thing 2 years later in 1978. This time he set the fastest lap at Watkins Glen, in which he retired from third late in the race as a fill-in for Ronnie Peterson at Lotus, who had tragically lost his life at the Italian Grand Prix. The final time this happened was by Derek Warwick, who in 1982 set the fastest lap at the Dutch Grand Prix, which was the race before Henton set his fastest lap. The final stat I have is one of my favorites. Filipe Alliot started 109 Grand Prix from 1984 to 1994, and in these 109 races he failed to finish on the lead lap a single time, making him the driver with the most starts that never finished on the lead lap. 66 of these races ended in retirement, leaving 43 races he finished, and I tried to find if he ever came close to finishing on the lead lap, and he never really did. The closest I could find was the 1993 Brazilian Grand Prix, in which he finished 7th, in which he went a lap down on lap 54 of 71, but he still finished about 40 seconds off the lead lap. The drivers that are next for most career starts without finishing on the lead lap are Jonathan Palmer at 82 and Piercarlo Gonzani at 75. With the way races are today, with the usage of the safety car being more common as opposed to never being used for the majority of Alliot's career and drivers being given their lap back under the safety car, I don't think we'll ever see a driver come close to matching this, making this, in my opinion, one of Formula One's most unbreakable records. For comparison, since 2010, the longest streak of failing to finish on a lead lap to start a career is 19, which was set by Jerome D'Ambrosio, Will Stevens, and Pascal Wehrlein. Hopefully you enjoyed these strange and obscure stats and learned something from the video. If you have any stats that you think are not well known, comment them below, as I would enjoy to see them, and thanks for watching.